Welcome. Today I'm going to be going over what's in the box for Dominion Menagerie. And so, I haven't really played this game yet except for playing online, but I think I understand pretty much all of the cards really well. There might be one or two functionalities that I don't fully understand, but I understand the majority of the expansion, including the Ways and the Exile. So, um, So some of the cards, there's about 7, I think, altogether. 7 or 8 cards, action cards in the supply, that will work with your Exile mat. And so for this first video, I thought we'd go over the cards that work with your Exile mat. Then in another video, we'll go over the cards that work with horses, which are an action card that isn't in a supply. So we'll go over those in a separate video or videos. And then we'll go over the regular cards that don't have anything to do with exiling or horses. And then, obviously, we'll go over the ways and the events in separate videos as well. So, let's get started. So, let's just do them all. So here we have the camel train. And it says that you'll exile a non-victory card from the supply. And then whenever you gain this, so when you gain this, exile a gold from the supply. So exiling is still technically part of your deck. At the end of the game, all of the cards that are still sitting on your exile mat will go into your deck. That includes all of the curses / wasteland cards, all those minus point cards, maybe even victory point cards. If they're sitting on your exile mat, they will go towards your score. So what's really cool though is the attack card, one of the attack cards that give out the curses / wastelands, because it's wastelands for me. The cool thing about them is they're a little tamer, because normally those minus point cards do 2 different things. They are going to give you minus points at the end of the game, yes, but they're also going to be a filler. They're going to fill your deck with useless cards. They're going to mess up your turns, most likely, right? And so, by putting them onto your exile mat, even though you're being attacked and you're getting those minus point cards at the end of your game, they will at least minimize that filler of cards that will mess up your deck. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean, however, they will stay there. The menagerie, which I replaced with Coven, which does the exact same thing Coven did, once the supply for the curse pile is gone, or wasteland pile is gone, all of your curses, wastelands that are sitting on your exile mat will go into your discard pile. All of them. Every single one. All at once. And so then you'll have that filler there, for sure. But when they go to your exile mat, it will be very hard to get rid of them. Because the only way you can get cards off of your exile mat is if you gain a card exactly the same. So if you wanted, like for instance, if you had the ability to trash cards, and you're like, but all my wastelands are sitting on the exile mat, I can't trash them because they're sitting there on my exile mat. How am I supposed to get rid of them? Well, the only way to get rid of them faster than that is to buy yourself a curse or a wasteland. If you buy that from the supply, then you could discard all of the wastelands / curses sitting on your exile mat to your discard pile, and then you could potentially start getting rid of those pesky minus point cards, for sure. But while they're there, you can't get rid of them. So towards the end of the game, if they end up getting into your deck at the end of the game, well, you'll just be stuck with all that minus point cards, and you won't get rid of any of them, obviously. So that's something to note. So if you want to get rid of them early on, and you've got a bunch sitting here, then you're going to have to buy yourself a minus point card to get rid of them, if you've been getting attacked by that particular card, for instance. Or Black Cat also gives out curses, but they don't go to your exile mat with Black Cat. So that's something to note. Now, that means that goes for all of the other cards. If you have a gold sitting on your exile mat, because when you gain this, you get to exile gold from the supply, meaning you get to exile that gold to your exile mat. If you want to get that gold off of the exile mat, you're going to have to gain a gold, meaning, or buy a gold. You're going to have to do one of those two things later on, and then when you do that, you'll be allowed to take all of the golds, if there's more than one, for instance, off of the mat and into your discard pile. That means you don't have the option to, like, let's say you had 5 silvers sitting on your exile mat, and you only wanted a couple of them off of your exile mat to put into your discard pile. You would not be able to. You'd either have to take them all or none and leave them there. So those are your two options. You take them all or you leave them there. You can't just take one or two of however many there are. So that's something to note. And that's how that will work. And so you will get to, when you play this, you'll get to exile a non-victor card from the supply. It doesn't matter what it is, as long as it's not a victor card. And you'll get to put it onto the exile mat. And then whenever you gain or buy a card later down the road, that you'll be able to take off the copies of it that you have on your exile mat for later. So that's really cool. And so that's how that exiling works. So then we have a stockpile. And this one is basically like a gold, right? It only costs 3/2, and it's giving you 3 money just like a gold. And it's giving you a plus buy. But then when you play this, you'll exile it. So that means this is like a one-time use. It's going to sit on your exile mat, and then you're going to have to gain or buy a stockpile to take your stockpiles off of your exile mat, which means that once you run out of stockpiles in the supply, you obviously will not be able to gain or buy any stockpiles. And so when that happens, all of your stockpiles will be stuck on your exile mat until the game is over. So that is something to note, that there is a limit to how often you'll get to do that for each card in the expansion. So that is something to note. So, all right, let's continue on. We got some more cards to go over. So then we have 2 4-costing cards that also work with exiling. So let's go over them. Well, first we have the Bounty Hunter. Now this is going to give you a plus action, and then you'll exile a card from your hand. If you didn't have a copy of it in exile, you get plus 3 money. So, obviously there's nothing sitting on my exile mat right now. So let's say I was to exile, I don't know, an estate from my hand. Well, that would be the first estate sitting on the exile mat. And so you would get your plus 3 money because you only had that one exile. You only put that one estate there, and there was no estate on there beforehand. So you'd get that 3 money. But the next time you played Bounty Hunter and you exiled an estate and you had an estate sitting here, then you would not get the plus 3 money. So that's something to note. So, put a copper down, put an estate down, and if you don't want to exile any other cards, like any of your good cards, then I suggest buying yourself a copper or an estate, so that way you'll be able to take them off of your exile mat, and then continue playing the Bounty Hunter for that plus 3 treasure. So, that's how that works. Then we have Cardinal. Now, there are 4 attack cards in this expansion, and 3 of them will work with exile mat. So, let's go over it. So the Cardinal is going to give you plus 2 treasure, and then each other player reveals the top 2 cards of their deck, exiles 1 costing from 3 to 6, and discards the rest. So that's kind of interesting. There's a lot of cards that do that, right? That reveal the top 2 cards of their deck, and usually what happens? They get trashed, right? Well, this one's a little tamer, because instead of trashing a card from 3 to 6 like the Giant would do from Adventures, Cardinal is just going to exile one of those cards and discard the rest. So at least you don't lose that card permanently, costing from 3 to 6. So this one is definitely a tamer version of the Giant, for sure. At least you can get it back. So, at some point. So that's pretty cool. So that's a pretty nice attack card. It's not super powerful, but it is definitely unique, considering exiling is brand new. Alright, so let's continue on. Let's see if we can get through all of the exile cards. We only have 4 more to go over, at least for the actions. I think there's 1 or 2 in the events. that exile. Okay, so then we have displace. You'll exile a card from your hand and gain a differently named card costing up to 2 more than it. So, kind of reminds me of Remodel from the base game, right? Except instead of trashing the card, you're going to exile the card from your hand and then gain a differently named card costing up to 2 more than it. So that's pretty cool. You couldn't get the same thing, obviously. And it does say up to 2, so you could potentially gain a card with the same cost as long as it had a different name. So obviously you wouldn't be able to, like, oh, I don't know, exile a province and then gain a province. Because, that would not be a differently named card. So that's how that works. And that's why they put that there. So that way players couldn't be like, oh, let's just exile a province so we can get a province every time. No, that would not work. That would be a broken card if they did that. So obviously the differently named card is there for that particular reason. Okay, then we have the manta ray. And so that's not too bad of a picture. You do what you can with these small little, Anyways, so this one's going to give you +1 action, +2 treasure, and then each other player exiles a wasteland from the supply. And you guys play with curses, so we'll exile a curse from the supply. If they can't, they discard their exiled wastelands. So what that means is, like I was saying earlier, if they can't exile any more curses or wastelands to their exile mat, then they're going to discard all of them, and those are all going to end up into their discard pile. So that's something to note. So, and, there are times when you have only like 2 wastelands left, and you're playing with 4 people, right? And so they all get hit by the same attack, right? So that's 3 people, right? Well, what happens then? Well, obviously 2 people are going to get it, and the other person is going to have to discard their wastelands from their exile mat to their deck. But then the next time you played this, obviously you could play it again. Each other player would exile as a wasteland, and those wastelands would not be there. So then they would end up getting hit by the exile mat. And so that kind of makes a little bit of more of a strategic. Do you want to do that to your opponents or not? It's kind of interesting because then they would not be able to buy those wastelands or curses. So they would sit there the entire time. They would have a way of trashing them. But maybe you would want to do it so that way they'd have a whole bunch of useless cards. So I guess it just depends on your own strategy of how you want to work that. But that's kind of interesting, if that was possible, and that's how it worked out. That would be pretty cool. So, all right, we'll continue in the next video. We have still at least 2 more exiles.